Hello again to all of you. And the next presentation will be carried out by Professor Antonio Malpica. He is the professor of Middle Ages history since 1998 in the University of Granada, and he's specialized in archaeology, Middle Ages history and archaeology. He's mainly specialized in the Kingdom of Granada. He's carried out many different interventions in terms of in archaeological terms in the Kingdom of Granada. He's also published several written works like settlements and castles. Antonio has in fact written many papers and books, very interesting works. And he's now a little bit divided between Madinat Ilbira, the Alhambra, and the coast of Granada. During these years, his books and works have been characterized by his scientific rigorous approach. He received the Scientific Research Award, and he's been working in the archaeological settlement of Madinat Ilbira, and when the Legacy of Al-Andalus Foundation was assigned as one of the coordinators of the commemoration of the first millennium of Granada, we knew that we had to focus on Madinat Ilbira, something we had not studied well enough up to now. The relationship between Madinat Ilbira and Granada is something that is essential, and it is a chapter that needed to be studied, and it was a great opportunity to value the work that has been carried out in the last years. So we would like to thank Antonio for his contributions. We've shared with him the preparation of the exhibition that is available in the Science Park Museum of Granada, and we've spent many hours with him and his team. And we must say that there is a very rigorous approach in all the works they have prepared for the exhibition on Madinat Ilbira, and I can tell you that we have worked a lot and in a very rigorous way. I won't take any more time, and he's the essential figure in the Madinat Ilbira research, and he's the one who should tell you about this. Good morning. It is for me a source of great satisfaction to be here in this seminar. Well, for me, a seminar should last like 7 days, and this is a meeting that will last only 2 days. And I'm very happy of being here in the Charles V Palace, very close to the exhibition that has been hosted by the Alhambra and that has led to these discussions. This morning, when I left the house in the morning, I went to the bank, to the new bank that I have, where I have my accounts, and I had to sign a paper. I had forgotten my secret code to use to be able to manage my bank accounts through the internet site. And well, I will not tell you about the code, about this PIN number. I don't have much money, but it's the only money I have. And Jose Carlos told me, it's a pity that I won't be able to go to your presentation. And I said, don't worry, I will tell everybody that you wanted to come, Jose Carlos, but that you couldn't come. So he thought I wouldn't dare, but I do dare. So thank you, Jose Carlos. I would like to refer to two very close friends of mine who have died not long ago, and I would like to dedicate this presentation to them. It is a real pity that they are not here. Manolo Acien, who's been a brother for me, and Miguel Barceló, who's also been like a brother for me, but an older brother. They have both died more or less at the same time. Terrible coincidence. And therefore, thinking about them, I would like to reflect on several points, because I think that when you try to say something, you should really and actually say something. You cannot limit yourself to carrying out an analysis that leads to nothing. It's not that I want to go against what I'm going to say, but I would like to question many things. I'm going to question things that I thought were true in the past, but now I'm not so convinced. A great anthropologist, that's my uncle. He wrote in French, and he's very well known in France, but not here. So he used to say, when someone criticizes me, I should study and see if that person is right or not. Immaculada, please excuse me if I go beyond my time, because the advantage of having Immaculada here as my moderator is that, she's a very close person for me, and also that I know she won't be too rough with me. My presentation will be divided into 3 parts. First of all, I'm going to carry out a theoretical reflection. I know that everyone is, in general, we're all afraid of theoretical reflection. Anna asked me if I was going to talk about physics. No, I will mention physics, but I will not focus on physics, as I did in the past already here. So, in this first part, we're going to talk about what we think when we try to approach reality. But I'm going to start saying that reality does not exist. This is something that it is a concept that has been taken by thinking, but in fact, reality does not exist. That's when I lost my innocence, when I discovered this. A friend of mine used to say that there are no fair things or unfair things, there are legal things or illegal things, but that of course does not mean that we cannot, even if reality does not exist, we can try to get knowledge, acquire knowledge. And this is in relation to the formation of this Andalusi city. Therefore, the second part of my presentation will refer to what is a city, or what do we think is a city. And then thirdly, we will talk about how to define the city of Madinat Ilbira. The second part is important because most of us have always thought that cities will always exist, that they are eternal things, and that it is a positive thing. And I will question this too. I would like to thank the Alhambra Council and its director. And I must say that I appreciate her a lot, personally appreciate her a lot, and I want to say this here publicly. I would also like to thank Rafael Gómez Guzmán and our friend José Miguel Portas Vilches, 2 people I love and that are very wise. And I would also like to thank María Jesús Viguera. She's a great author, and the first time I heard her do a presentation, I said, you're extraordinary, because she really achieved a great success. So thank you to all of them, and also thank you to the Legacy of Al-Andalus Foundation. I must say I'm very thankful for this. I'm very thankful for everything they do. And that's enough. Today is St. Valentine's Day, and I've never celebrated St. Valentine because my birthday will be in 2 days, and I cannot celebrate 2 things in just 1 week time. The theme I bring to you, even if you think it appropriate to bring a work that goes beyond description, is based on the approach of problems that have an anthropological and historical content. Elements that are uttered in one or other way do not generate knowledge by themselves. I must tell you that we've discovered that in the recent times there's been the development of an activity with the main goal of considering objects and structures as components that could be analyzed in an individualized way for them to be integrated into approaches that are not scientific approaches, but approaches that function as examples of realities. The thing is, the idea is to present order, disorder, getting away from complexity. But complexity is a principle that exists throughout the universe, considered from the physical perspective, the biological one, and so on. Without complexity, the universe wouldn't be possible, life wouldn't be possible. This is why human thinking should approach topics and issues in a complex way, but not through a disordered order. Any reasoning that may be done goes beyond the area of society, who is the owner of knowledge. And this implies that we need to establish a hierarchization of the process of producing knowledge. The scientific dimension and the social dimension should be established in a specific order. This is why we must refer to the process of creation of thinking, which is part of knowledge. The attention should be focused on the scientific aspect. Therefore, the scientists should not be the only ones to define the needs, but their role is key. Research must be carried out through a discussion where the priority lines should not be defined by a previous process without taking into account the dynamics of science. Otherwise, this will lead to distortions. A very common distortion is considering the need of generating elements that we put into groups that are not well defined. Here I'm referring to considering heritage as the final purpose. Even if we agree with that, it is necessary to define this term so that we can draft and elaborate a concept that will be socially operating in thinking. So what is heritage? This is not well defined in an accurate and clear way, even though we may agree more or less on its meaning. Heritage is the material legacy of the societies of the past, especially for the archaeologists. Then we are going into a double topic that is not often discussed. On one hand, we must talk about the working processes of human beings, and also there's the aspect of the testimony of the past integrated into the concept of heritage. And this is a main contradiction. We need to enter into a selection that will necessarily introduce qualitative elements. And this is how we can enter into discussing a problem I would like to mention. This is the categorization of a series that has been grouped. It is the definition of beauty that is often referred to. This must be kept by the society, and it is also something that is changing.
And taste has got a history of its own because it's closely linked to the social condition in a double sense. Because it's both an expression of social classes, even of the specific condition of every being, and also in terms of a definition of specific times. More simply put, every social group and every historic period have a different aesthetic conception. But the thing is that witnessing beauty is not done with the eyes of class or society, but with the eyes of a period which is always later than the one before. So we have a double selection from that perspective. On the one side, of those who defined them with its works, which intended to be beauty in its time and according to its social condition. On the other hand, of those who have fabricated this selective concept according to which they were configured as artistic. So there's a conflict there, put in a tray, which is complicated with the idea of the application of budgets and materialness, because works stemming from intellectual capacities and manual capacities of human beings make up a set of knowledge and cultural accumulation which allow for the same beauty concept to become integrated. So it's only exceptionality justification. So conception becomes a single one, and from a current perspective, it's an expression of beauty and perfection which can be maybe only technique. It's a whole of a discussion at which we should end. Resolution sometimes is given to us by the application of monuments, which is a language created by the privileged classes to be read by themselves and by those who are dominated. And these are the true protagonists of their creation, both in technical and material terms. The setups, the postulates made by Andrea Carandini prevent us from entering into more detail, but we are aware that they should be modified and widened. Reaching this point, we should explain which are the disciplines acting on the focalization of a series of elements in a set which we consider to be belonging to heritage. We consider that the knowledge process should be structured around a hierarchy, and of course we should pay attention to the scientific character which makes up the theoretical set of a cultural and heritage asset. In that sense, we've got to refer to the understanding of evolution made by human societies, which are always understood from a mainly material perspective. I'm not ashamed of saying that, just in case you had any doubt. And we enter into the discussion of the interaction between the human being and nature, configuring the working processes, and as a consequence, the social mechanisms defining them, because they are not abstractions. There are no abstractions without historic progression. So the explanatory systems need, in part of archaeology, understood not as a method but as science, because it needs history confluences, and not just understood as the reading of it made by the power, which is traditionally leaning against written sources, which are of course leaning biased towards the control of human societies, but also playing an important role. Anthropology plays an important role because it gives it a bigger outreach in time. From that perspective, it is, even if it's legitimate to understand the historic processes from the recovery of the testimonies of working processes, also the understanding of the technique configuring it as explanatory elements is important. So we should be speaking about its dynamics. So we couldn't expect that the temporary framework would be unique and not pay attention to exceptionality, even if there are different tenses and rhythms with accelerations which are coined at specific moments, which are the ones to our concerns, even if they refer to the coagulation at a specific moment of an evolution which is not frequently appreciated. So, reality, which is a concept which we would build based on the naive belief that it is not affected by dynamism, and also social dimension tell us that it exists and that it shouldn't be considered from the point of view of immutability. Social classes force an important movement and dispersion of that reality. We cannot say that we do not know. We've got to highlight that knowledge stems from a constant process of elaboration. The statement by the settling of quantum physics following the cat's paradox formulated by Erwin Schrödinger allows us to say that the animal is alive and dead at the same time, but in different levels of the universe. Both of them are true, but not capable of interacting among them between themselves because of the quantum deconsistency. So knowledge is made and produced after choosing a certain reality which is no more, which is no longer a reality, because it is just a possibility. Also, it is no reality because it comes from a different situation from the one we are going through when we elaborate it. When we watch a star, we're not watching it, but in terms of the speed of light. There's nothing out there if we do not see it, but what we see is configured by ourselves in an intellectual creative process. Schrödinger, in a book called The Witnessing of My World, speaks about these. Physics should be permeated by philosophy. I also believe that archaeology and history, art history, should also be permeated by philosophy. Of course, I must got to tell you that I got grade A in arts history with Victoria Ferrer. She loved me, just that. If, as an archaeologist, even if some would speak in a different way to that I use, this brings me to that beautiful scene of Les Bourgeois Gentilhommes of Jean-Baptiste Molière, and the bourgeois tells his intellectual friend that he's in love and that he wants to write a letter to his loved one, and he would ask, should I use prose or verse? And the intellectual said, no, not verse, no, prose, not, neither in verse nor in prose. And he would say, there are just two forms of writing, either verse or prose. And he would say, well, so when I tell him, Nicolasa, bring me my slippers and my gown, which is the style I'm using, prose. So I spend my whole life speaking in prose, and I didn't know that. If, as an archaeologist, I excavate a site, I generate knowledge while working, but not all my knowledge stems from the excavation process, but I've got knowledge taken from before that I'm going to modify and transform. As Sauro Jelikic, my friend, said, excavation, archaeological field work, tells you how can you work on an environment in order to turn it into a scientific construct. There are not two archaeologists who work the same. If the aim is just to create a cultural asset for it to become part of public heritage, the way it's done is different to that which would be practiced is you're just doing a scientific work. Also because the remains, the remnants are not to be found the way they were originally. Also, we count on the fact that the site is subject to constant modification. As in any kind of elaboration of knowledge, there are extreme positions set up by our friend Richard Hodges, truffle searchers and parachutists. The working method is closely linked to the formulation of theoretical standpoints, but they are conditioned by the search system itself. So in that sense, there's the need for a technical approach, because it makes it possible to analyze the remnants. That technical learning is the one allowing for a decoding of it, because the data we have, they are not analytical categories in themselves. They should be turned into such a thing through an intellectual process which is started with the choosing of the archaeological site, and it goes on to, or it follows on with the technique chosen. Maybe that's why the concept of heritage turned into such a thing intentionally has allowed for excavations to take place with the only aim to preserve the remnants, so highlighting very venal realities. Without that theoretical discussion, no analysis can take place, and we should always do an analysis which in this case aims at showing the needs of an archaeology, which is usually chosen as a set of techniques which look for a specific aim without many trouble and without much of a discussion. Only elaborated knowledge allows for the creation of a cultural asset which will be understood by most of the population, which is the target of our work. I'm going to refer to an important problem. It is the rise of cities in Al-Andalus, and I will focus on the site of Madinat Ilbira, where we've been working for many years. And people would say, I always like to referring to that work as Antonio Malpica and his team, or the team of Antonio Malpica's team, or the team and Antonio Malpica, because there's no such a thing as an isolated archaeologist. It's teamwork. We're talking about teamwork. We should say that research could be justified in itself, but it reaches adequate levels when shown to citizens under the condition of social contradictions being shown. So no sweetened neutral production is given to the public, because human archaeology is always the fruit of working processes. Of course, research, investigation and dissemination are fundamental. The aim should be clear, so there's a social usefulness for it, and also a technical use of it, because when you bring remnants to light, you've got to protect them, and its best form of protection is them being witnessed by most of the population. In our case, we are still doing research which will not end with the archaeological actions, and which is supported by the disciplines of conservation. All processes are joined, even if at certain moments some disciplines prevail over the rest. For us, the ultimate end is the search for historic and anthropological knowledge. In that sense, the creation of the Andalusian city is the most important historic discussion. But we do not forget that there's a need to explain why a city exists, because there's no compulsory reason for the city to emerge, at least in all kinds of possible societies. We may say that the city is not spontaneously born, but as the result of a social process. We cannot say that it's a mechanism of defense against the attacks of nature, because the human being can become integrated in nature, and it has mechanisms to support, to endure nature and make it grow. So we shouldn't be talking about a hostile environment per se, because in fact that's just a justification for exploiting it in a systematic fashion. Its control shouldn't be established starting from an overlapping structure. Also, its existence is not compulsorily needed for an exchange between the units and making up the space. In due time, Eric Wolf, the Austrian anthropologist, that's the reason I say Wolf and not Wolf, highlighted that exchanges can take place without urban life in the vicinity. So it is possible, more than possible, to think that its fundamental role is that of subjecting the countryside in order to establish some management system over the surplus of production. In that sense, the city exists because it submits the real world. So that's why we believe that a city is not considered to be the engine of human settlements in the first place, but rather of its reordering. Would it be too much saying that the walls of cities are made up with the blood of peasants? That's what Gandhi used to say when confronted with the destruction of the Hindu peasant societies. It cannot be applied with the same intensity to all societies because the settling of colonies is immediately overimposed on rural life. There's no doubt that they are spaces for exerting power and controlling taxes. We shouldn't forget that pre-capitalist societies, all of them are made up of the decomposition of primitive societies and are made up of different elements. And social groups making it up are not hierarchically organized or arranged. And mutual help and solidarity ties are usually powerful, with the exception of feudal society, where the church became the solvent, and out of which capitalist society appeared, the worst of human societies possible. And then the state, which is apparently very powerful, without the solidness of define and structure state structures, but rather stemming from some kind of a sacred sense, or without clear mediation between the state power and social structures configuring peasant societies, peasant units. So the need to maintain rural communities is hampered by the practice of an economy in which the money, good money, is very important, as Marx made clear. In this case, we're clearly talking about the taxing mercantile society of Al-Andalus. So we must highlight that the city in this environment stems from a different perspective of other societies with taxes. In that sense, we've got to pose a wider question in order to start the discussion we are thinking of. So let's attack the target of our reflection. An initial question appears almost immediately. We're referring to the ancient world crisis and of the structure of population settlement during a large period that, according to different territories, goes from the 3rd century to a date reaching down to the 6th century. That territorial organization and urban life survived and were prolonged. So the general crisis of urban nuclei in the Mediterranean Europe is a differential process in terms of duration. That situation is clearly perceived in Hispania, even if there's a certain balance between what's been found in the Iberian Peninsula and that found in other areas of the Mediterranean, specifically in Italy. So the characteristics which have been highlighted show a series of elements. For example, the appearance of a layer of dark earth, which is an index of abandonment and shows the dedication of some areas to farming. Second, there's an abandonment of collective use spaces and a deterioration of the concept of the public sphere. It is shown in several forms of appropriation spaces. So houses grow over former streets, but also the levels of streets grow up. So strata have a very significant organic component and become black. Also, you may see the new use of building materials which were formerly used in all the buildings. and means a lack of specialization in work, maybe because of the lack of demand by upper classes as a consequence of the crisis of the old aristocracy. So huts are being built in places which were public spaces before, as has been shown at the Forum of Luni, which was studied by Ward Perkins. The most significant archaeological index is the existence of holes which were used to place the logs which made up the structure of wooden lodgings. And the immediate result is the abandonment of certain areas of the city and the occupation in forms of islands or settlement islands. This configuration brought about a series of favorable conditions for a new urban organization, as the one perceived from the Islamic world. The fragmentation of urban spaces and the separation between some which are inhabited and occupied allow for a segmented society to become established without much trouble. Also, a loss of the centralness of the former centralness is perceived because the forum vanishes and is occupied by private lodgings, even huts, as has been said. That way, new conditions for urban life are generated, no longer centered around the forum, but in a more or less precise duality with two specific differentiated spaces, that of the power and the city itself, as we will see. Running in parallel, rural settlements are also become disentangled, organized.
In general, it was said by our friend Broglio is that there are general definitions, he says. This is by Wickham. Each area, of course, has a different social and structure and an economy that would react in a different way to the weakening of the inter-regional trade. I'm sure that this would probably reflect a territorial diversity in the destinations or in the features of aristocracy. And he continues, it could be said that the lack of hierarchy, of an articulated hierarchy of the settlement focused in cities and in the rural level in substantial groupings is in fact a sign of the weakness of the social hierarchy. This is linked to weakness in trade and handicraft specialization. The correlation is even more stronger. And a new system based on social differentiation was what led to the feudal society, as Mr. Valenti highlighted. The destruction of the previous formation didn't lead to the tax trade system, although it was a necessary condition for it to be developed. The territorial fragmentation and the lack of centrality leads to the scattered settlements. Although there was not a process of total liberalization in the situation of the countryside, everything indicates that pressure was lower. This topic is very important, precisely the action of the aristocracy, because it is logically an archaeological narrative. We need to determine where spaces of power are situated and how they are organized. This is something that has not been really appropriately carried out. In this condition, the establishment of new settlers, both Arabs and Berbers, is a fact that implies a change in the general situation. In fact, there were people coming from the east and from northern Africa. So, in fact, yes, the Arabs invaded Spain. So, in spite of the arguments against that are difficult to defend, but with a great success at the academic levels, José María San Juan just published a book on this topic, we can say that yes, that the Arabs invaded Spain. And this led to the creation of a new society, the tax trade society. And this led to a society that was established through a previous population and with the arrival of the new settlers. And in fact, if we have analyzed the specific cases instead of analyzing the dynamics of power itself, the capacity of penetration of the new forms can only be explained by direct action of the power of the state. And this would lead to a very easily detectable pressure. In the first case, it has been said that there was a fight in the 9th century with Umar ibn Hafsun as a key figure. Not a religious fight, but a fight marked by the economic and social training. In the second case, we must talk about the important migration coming of populations coming from the west, from the east and northern Africa, led to the settlements. And in this same second case, we can have a different interpretation, and this was mentioned by my friend Manzano. And this led to many discussions. In fact, there's been a different interpretation saying that Syrian Jindees organized in the middle of the 8th century a rural territory based on taxes. Situation the rural populations in areas where taxes would be paid to the Arabs. I don't want to write anymore, so perhaps I will not change this soon. In any case, we can highlight that there is the coexistence of rural structures that were typical of the old world and the new rural structures introduced by the new settlers. So, in my view, rural life was structured in a new way, also because it was not a clear definition of it. In fact, irrigation, which is one of the contributions of those who migrated to Al-Andalus, led to an ecological and economic transformation. If we irrigate the farms, we are creating different conditions in the Mediterranean physical environment. In some way, it is a derivation of the agro-ecosystem of the oasis, created in the desert many centuries ago. The idea is to combine heat and humidity, which leads to new plants and greater development of the traditional cultures. Therefore, there was an agriculture with a productivity that had been increased, and as all the products produced by this new agriculture could not be stored, this led to an economy where exchanges were increasing. The reality is, in fact, that this process is focused on the creation of urban areas, organizing the territories that became bigger and bigger. And all this can be seen at the archaeological levels, especially if we analyze the growing coin mass. So this process indicates that urban structures appear as soon as we see a combination of the interest of the rural inhabitants with an adequate hierarchization, with a dominant layer, which leads to the development of power mechanisms. And this linked to the notion of Asabiyya. This is combined, as I say, to the Umayyad situated in Córdoba, scattered throughout the different territories. So, these two groups create the Medina as the key element for the tax control and the economic realization of the production surplus. The approach here, or what we must consider at this point, is whether we have archaeological prints of this process, and above all, if it is possible to define some lines that will tell us how this city is organized. We must suspect that urban structure must show the social differentiation from the very start, as this is the basis from which it is created. Those power mechanisms should be visible in the city, in spite of the homogeneous image we get. Even if the notion of power and state is very mediatized, we think that they can be perceived in the urban conformation and in its distribution. With regards to the first idea, I would like to focus on several aspects. With regards to the second idea, I will just leave this general presentation, as there is a lot to be done in archaeological research. Professor Ignacio Sares, at the end of the exams, he just as longa vita brevis. When it was the end of the exam and I didn't have time to say everything. So we cannot say everything when we do exam, and we cannot write everything in a paper either. So I'm going to focus on the organization of Madinat Ilbira, and I want to open this to everyone, those who have visited it and those who haven't, and nevertheless discuss it. And as someone I know said, nothing has been published on Madinat Ilbira. Well, in any case, we can see a way of socially structuring and economic structuring the urban settlement. There are two different spaces in the first Islamic cities, that of the space of power and the urban space. I think that Jean-Claude Verson approach is still valid. This was done by him. There's a third space mentioned by this author too, and that is the essential space for the articulation of Andalusi and Islamic cities, and that is the space of the High Mosque, the main mosque. I think that the articulation of the different sites of the settlement can be understood through the different projects carried out in the different years, 2001, 2005, 6, 7 and 9, as well as through the general prospection carried out in 2003 and the study of the different materials in 2006, 2008, 2010. The final result will be published in a few months now, in a few months' time, and it will have over 2,000 pages. Thanks to this research, we can highlight the different aspects within which we see the social differentiation and the presence of a minority control in the city. This can be explained, like, for example, in 85, when we were working in Los Guajares, we said that all the possibilities should not be eliminated because the settlement could have been created by nobody knows who. We can speak using verses or prose or neither one or the other. It's what we do most of the time. The next project we're going to publish will be called like that. Neither poetry nor prose. So these are the Roman remains. This is the situation of Medina Elvira, the Roman remains. Everything is available in the exhibition in the Science Museum of Granada. Here you have the prospection areas, where you can see the areas that have been excavated more in detail, the areas where there are more ceramics and where there are less. These are the different perspective studies, and as you can see, they're not very many, taking into account the wide extension of the surface. We can also see here all the actions carried out by mining activities, the advance of the city, also residence areas, and so on. In fact, the city is divided into several parts, and that's something that can be easily seen in the settlement. An area with the higher area with important settlements. Here, another one there. Was on a little hill. Then the plain area where the necropolis is, and then another area, intermediate area, where the mosque is situated and the handicraft workshops. This organization of the city reflects also the topographical organization. So the upper part, the upper space here, coincides with the surveillance and control structures, so the Alcazaba. The fortified area, the walls are situated here. This could be the beginning of the city, but then on the plain there are some settlements that date from the 9th century or the 10th century, and we have a wide occupation here. There's another differentiation, which is the topographic one. Here in the upper part, the Tajo Colorado and the Alcazaba, and Sombrerete, they have an architectonic structure that it is very superior to what we can see in the plain area of the city. The first appearance of these structures is here, and I would like to insist on the fact that we have not excavated much. In fact, the surface is very wide. When the Leonor princess becomes queen, that's when perhaps we will know something about Medina Elvira, and that will be perhaps in 50 years' time, but thanks God I won't be alive then. You know, dying is a terrible thing for the family, but it is very good for the humankind. I have a grandchild who's only 2.5 years, and I am happy to know that she will still be alive when I die, and she will say, "Oh, my granddad, he was really stupid." But I hope she will say that because she will have studied in Oxford. In any case, here we have the topographic reality, and the power is settled here because of obvious reasons, because they can control everything from there. There's another area here, the mosque, and then all the area of the Medina with Christian necropolis and what we think is an Mozarab necropolis, and the Islamic one too. And then in this area, this is where we have the walls of the city with a great gate here. This is the area controlling the city. And I've discussed this with my friend Pierre Richard, and this is the area that is considered to be the origin of the city, but it could also be said that this space here formalized what was actually happening to the inhabitants living here. So people who were farmers with irrigated agriculture, and then the Manuhali groups arrived and who were settled in Loja. The volume of material that exists is an extraordinarily important volume, because the pieces, well, they are still there. In my village, if you didn't live there, you wouldn't get any water, and I had to become a neighbor, and I'm afraid that one day I'll be perhaps the president of one of the electing tables for the elections, and then I'll say I'm sick or something not to get. So I haven't been able to find the images because I didn't want to scan the ones in the exhibition, but we can see that the import ceramics are mainly in the upper part of the city, just like glasses. So there is a clear difference, but this differentiation is also expressed in other areas, not only ceramics. In spite of the appearance of the standardization of ceramics, and this is a reality since the 9th century, especially since the 12th century, in spite of this, we find there ceramics that have a greater value than the ones we find in the lower parts of the city. And why? Because the upper ceramic is import ceramics. Pieces from Abbasiya, some Umayyad pieces, previous ones, and Algarabid pieces too. It's not ceramics coming from Cordoba, but from the east, just like these glasses, pieces of glass of Syrian origin. And if to this we add the fact that the metallic material is situated in the same area, because the metallic pieces from the tools are found in the lower part of the cities, and the handicraft material is found in the area of the mosque, and then the metallic material of a certain quality is found in the upper part. This indicates that the higher part is the most important area, the seat of power. This is the piece where we can see the comparison. So, all this shows something very clear, very important. That is that the city from the beginning was created with an element of hierarchization, and this is imposed. So, this means that it becomes a reality in the creation of the city. When we know the DNA, we can understand the evolution, and this is something that has been marked from the very beginning because of the evolution of the space of power, the urban space, and the mosque. And as I had said, that I will say something about Granada, and although Antonio Vihuela will say more about Granada and better than what I can say, but in any case, I'm quite old, but in any case, I've always been afraid of cities because I lived in a village. When we were children, we were told, if you go to Granada, you should be careful. And then we came to Granada with my mom and my dad, and my mom went to buy some stamps in the Mecenas street. And when she wanted to pay, she had been robbed. So of course they were right, telling us that it was very dangerous to come to the city. And in the year 58 or so, 500 pesetas was a lot, and that was the amount she carried. So I'm going to tell you a few things about Granada. What we can observe about the city of Elvira, will the text be distributed to the audience here? So you should add the ISBN, or if the text is going to be published in in the website, at least for those who need to work on their curriculum. I don't need to do that, but in any case, it could be a good idea to give the reference. And in the text, there are more details about Madinat Ilbira. So what can be observed in the city of Elvira does not allow us to generalize what happened in Al-Andalus. Cannot be used to define this organization system of all territories. There are similar and different settlements, apart from the farmsteads and the mudun. We see that there are other areas, other structures. We've observed that these structures that are formed by walls, by areas protected by walls, as was explained by Guichard, have two different areas. One area of power in the upper part, and on the other one is the area for human groups that lived in the territory. But in some cases, they function as elements of the settlement, with houses occupied by families. These are not just fortifications. There are examples throughout the Al-Andalus. There are, for example, Bloja and Guadix. Some interventions carried out in Granada have shown the existence of a population that was integrated by reduced family groups with women and children. So this was not a military population. In Pamplona, in the square of the castle, we also find that. So in my opinion, this means that these are not castles, isolated castles occupied by a group of militaries, and that's it. So the same oscillation that we see in the use of the term when referring to Granada, this shows that not even the inhabitants of the time were sure that this was just a rural castle. So this means that there are some castles that are, as a student said, that we shouldn't use the name of castle because a castle is an expression of the feudal world. I don't totally agree with that. So, in any case, I've eliminated that word and used an alternative in my last book. So this means that when we talk about Granada, we're referring to a fortified structure where there are conditions for life. But this is not a city yet. The creation of the city took place later. And the creation of the city explains the social situation in which Madinat Ilbira was situated, the territory, and Granada too. Why was the city of Granada founded? That's the key question. I think we've been able to advance a lot, and we can state that there were economic, social, and political reasons for the creation of the city of Granada and the abandonment of Ilbira. Is this an exception? Well, from our perspective, it is an exemption, but from other perspectives, not. That's not the case. Thank you.